This is illegal. Warum kein Bürgermeister die Wohnungskrise in New York lösen kann. Interessant. Oh mein Gott, man kann das ja mittlerweile auch auf Deutsch umstellen. Aber wir gucken uns auf Englisch mit deutschen Untertitel oder was? Warte mal, wir machen mal den Audio-Track auf Deutsch. Das wird unangenehm jetzt. Ruhechat.
Am 4. November 2025 wurde Zoran Mdani zum Bürgermeister von New York City gewählt.
Ich find's toll. Ich find's erstmal macht keinen schlechten Eindruck.
Sein Wahlkampf war zusammen mit dem seiner Gegner darauf ausgerichtet, die überzeugendste Geschichte dafür zu liefern, wie die Stadt erschwinglicher gemacht werden kann.
Dass
Sehr gut.
arbeitende Menschen ein würdiges Leben verdienen.
Im Zentrum stand dabei das Thema Wohnraum.
Wohnraum ist viel zu teuer. Wir werden Hunderttausende von erschwinglichen Wohnungen bauen, schlechte Vermieter bekämpfen und die Preise einfrieren.
Oh mein Gott, ich weiß nicht, ob ich es schaffe, Chat. Das ist, oh no. Genfer Konventionen gelten auch für dich. Okay, wir gehen mal rüber auf Original.
But unfortunately, he won't make it more affordable. It will take decades to reverse the artificial scarcity of not enough affordable housing. From 1800 to 1900,
Digga, ich will nicht
New
die
York
Kommentare
City
lesen.
grew from a town of 60,000 people to one of the largest in the world. But until the late 1860s, most New Yorkers lived in Lower Manhattan. The buildings grew, but not a lot. Then it started to get crowded. Entire families lived in tenement apartments, barely larger than a modern studio apartment. Concerns about health and fire safety led to laws that required windows and courtyards. But then something changed. Elevators and steel enabled buildings to grow taller. Lower Manhattan expanded vertically. But the taller the building, the larger the shadow. Light and air was no longer just a concern for people living in the building, it was also a concern for their neighbors. High-end retailers demanded stricter zoning in response to the spread of multi-story factory lofts towards Fifth Avenue. In response came New York's 1916 zoning resolution. Buildings had to step back above a certain height. Then they looked away from the shadows and saw heavy industry exhaust spewing out next to residential homes. And they were like, maybe we should do something about that too. But the 1916 zoning was still very generous when it came to building. New York had enough space for millions of people. But not for long. All of New York's recent mayors have attempted to tackle the city's housing crisis.
Blasio has a $41 billion plan to preserve or...
Mayor Adams took his plan for what he calls the City of Yes.
One of the biggest efforts took place under Eric Adams, a zoning reform estimated to create 82,000 homes over 15 years. It's a series of incremental policy changes. Houses can have an accessory dwelling unit or an apartment inside the house. Low-density apartment zones can add a couple floors. Neighborhoods with tall buildings can be slightly taller. Some industrial districts were rezoned for housing and businesses. But this is not what a real housing boom looks like. In the 1920s, 729,000 homes were built in New York City, a rate of home building that makes us look utterly pathetic today.
Ja gut, die wurden halt auch gebaut, wie sie Bock haben. Ne? Die haben dann 2 Stäbe genommen, ein Pappdach und dann haben sie die gebaut.
The 1916 zoning was generous, although it required tall buildings to step back, depending on the street width and zone.
Die Frage ist, ob die ganzen, man sieht das ja in so dystopischen Filmen, die in die Zukunft gucken, werden in der Zukunft wirklich alle Wohnungen auf Basis der Tatsache, dass man sich irgendwie vor Wohnraumproblemen gestellt sieht, aussehen wie Apartments in Judge Dredd? Also so Gigakomplexe, Städte in Städten, die einfach in so vertikale Monster gedrückt werden. Das ist ja so diese dystopische Zukunft, der Megablock.
A building could go up 5 to 20 floors before stepping back. And after stepping back to the central quarter of the site, it could still be of unlimited height. A lot of the most beautiful buildings around Central Park were built from this era. But then they were made illegal. One of the most important ways to measure the density of buildings is the floor area ratio. The total area inside a building divided by the area of the lot it sits on. A 1-story building that covers the whole lot has a floor area ratio of 1. A 2-story building that covers half the lot also has a floor area ratio of 1. New York City's northern suburbs have some of the most stringent zoning in the United States, individual homes on single-acre lots. But unfortunately, this hasn't just been limited to suburbs. Today, New York City also strictly limits the floor area ratio of buildings, while its 1916 code did not. The Empire State Building has a floor area ratio of 31. The floor space inside the building is 31 times the area of the lot it sits on. Today, a new building next door, in the same zone, would only be allowed a floor area ratio of 15.
Die Hälfte.
40% of buildings in Manhattan today are too tall or too big to be built today. By the 1910s and the 1920s building booms, these changes weren't incremental. Row houses were replaced by large apartment blocks. Larger buildings were replaced by skyscrapers. As subways extended into Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx, open fields turned into dense neighborhoods. New York's population grew, and as incomes went up, living standards improved as families moved out of tenement rooms into their own apartments. Today, however, without enough new housing, rising wealth leads to small apartments being merged into bigger ones, with poor people being priced out. This isn't an easy fix. So to show these guys how it's done, I've decided to start my own party, the Henry George Was Right Party.
Okay.
And unlike Cuomo, everyone knows that the first step to a successful political campaign is a well-designed website.
Ah, es ist Werbung.
That's where Udo comes in. It's an all-in-one business management platform offering more than 45 apps. And with their website building application, we can easily create a custom site. We quickly define the type of site and our industry goals. Pick a color palette or insert our logo. Add a few pages and features and choose one of the available themes. Then
Erstmal
AI
Dark Mode,
generates a
Bruder. Dark
customizable
Mode.
website structure where we can simply drag and drop our George's propaganda. The first app is free for life with unlimited hosting, and you can get a free custom domain name for 1 year. Use the link www.udo.com/r/hoog-3. By the 1950s, New York's Planning Commission felt that it was time to change the city's zoning. At the top of the list of concerns was congestion, and not far behind it, the issue of not enough parking. The commission felt that
Infrastruktur, die das Auto herum gebaut wurde. Großartig. Amerika.
40 years of piecemeal changes had made the zoning code unwieldy and irrational.
Amerika einfach.
They also wanted to protect industrial jobs, but also residents from pollution. The 1916 zoning did not have an exclusively industrial zone. Instead, heavy industry was limited to operating in unrestricted zones.
Leider auch Deutschland. Ja, auch, aber nicht so. Also nicht so sehr. Auch, aber nicht ganz so schlimm.
That also allowed offices, retail stores, and housing. With post-World War II factories shifting from multi-story to single-story layouts and becoming more automated, more industrial land was needed. So in 1956, New York's Planning Commission hired the architectural firm Voorhees, Walker, Smith & Smith to prepare a new zoning system. Then New York City changed forever. Because in addition to increasing parking requirements and creating understandably separated heavy industry zones, the 1961 zoning code also introduced a new type of restriction: floor area ratio limits, the single biggest factor behind the decrease in zone capacity for new buildings in New York City. At first, this wasn't a problem. From the 1960s to the 1980s, people and jobs moved out to the suburbs.
Ja. Aber du kannst es halt nicht mehr in den Städten so bauen, ja?
It didn't matter if the shoe couldn't fit. New York's population shrank. But as the city started to grow again in the 1990s, attempts to build new houses bumped up against the zoning limits, leading to a housing shortage and rising rents. Getting rid of heavy industry out of a dense city is understandable, but restricting the FAR is objectionable. Today, the city is left with the relics of unrestricted floor area ratio in Manhattan, simultaneously some of the most beautiful buildings in the entire city, with the supply artificially constrained in the other boroughs where people are pressed for rent and space. In 2025, an economist estimated that if the floor area ratio limits were removed, the floor space in New York could increase by 71%, and the rent could go down by 18%. Rather than just a tight squeeze on one island, a more cohesive spread across all 5 boroughs, and a reduced pressure on Manhattan. But attempts to go back are hard. For years, it was made impossible. In the 20th century, the city charter was changed. New York City gained a New York City Council with 51 city council members, each representing one of the city's 51 council districts, and they gained power over land use decisions. If one council member opposes a proposed rezoning in their district, like against changing the FAR limits, the others will defer to their opinion and also vote no, regardless of what their own opinion might be. It's a wicked problem.
Klingt nach Bürokratie ist das Problem.
There's a very large competition to take part of the land. Upzoning across all districts would be an overall net positive for housing affordability. That land, however, has been split. Rather than being able to blanket remove these constraints, but it will still take decades to reverse the damage.
Bin sehr gespannt, diese Mamdani-Situation. Das wird eine Mammutaufgabe und es wird auch ein bisschen davon abhängen, mit welchen Problemen er langfristig zu tun hat und ob er das schaffen kann. Hoffentlich schafft er es und er stellt die Weichen auf jeden Fall. Das ist ja wichtig, schon mal die Weichen zu stellen. Das ist das Video. Sehr, sehr interessant. Die Zoning-Regelungen kannte ich dazu nicht. Aber wenn er die Zoning-Regelungen ändern könnte, dann, ich meine, du musst ja auch ein bisschen warten, bis die Gebäude gebaut werden.